Well, let's stay on this story. Some activists are demanding justice for the group of women attacked and raped in Krugersdorp last year while shooting a music video at a disused mine dump. Now, to discuss this further, I'm joined by Vetten. She is a researcher at the University of Johannesburg's Gender, Violence and Urban Transformation Project. Thank you so much, Lisa, for joining us this evening. I mean, it's a year later, Lisa, and there's still no justice for these victims, no convictions whatsoever. How is this possible? And we had 18 people that were arrested. And, you know, it just seems like something that should have been solved by now.
Well, yes, especially because Becky Cele at the time said no stone was going to be left unturned in order to track down those who had done this to the group of 8 women. I think the tragedy about this case is that it represents the majority of rape cases in South Africa. Last year, the police only and the prosecution services between them saw that only 1 in every 10 of the rape cases reported that year actually went on to be tried in court. So the vast majority of rape survivors never ever see the inside of a court. I think what's been especially difficult in this case is that the police also released the details. Sorry, I just had load shedding. The police also released the details of the women, their names and their physical addresses on WhatsApp within hours of the rape having occurred. So their experiences have been made even more difficult because people know who they are. They know where they live. And so I think speak to them today and they will tell you that they feel as if they live in a jail. They are fearful of going outside. They are fearful of what is going to happen to them. They cannot feel safe in any possible way.
And just, you know, talking about that last point that you mentioned, their personal details a few months ago being released, unfortunately, by police, you know, I can't even imagine the psychological impact. You just touched a little bit on that, you know, but the psychological impact on the victims when it comes to this, how deep is that actually?
It's deeply frightening. I mean, you do not... People know who you are. This is private information. And unfortunately, rape remains very stigmatized in South Africa. So people know who you are. They point at you in the street. Not only that, this has had an effect on some of women's ability to continue to work because people know who they are. That stigma rubs off and they don't necessarily want to be employing them. So they have to battle that stigma. They have to battle the sense of fear. They also have to battle the sense that information, private information about themselves, that they no longer have control over. And I think we must just put that in the context of being raped. When being raped, you have control forcibly taken away from you. Your ability to decide what is going to happen to you is taken right away from you. So when the police reinforce that by taking away decision over who you want to tell, who you want to have knowing this, it reinforces that sense of helplessness and that sense that your control has been taken away from you and that other people have greater power over your life than you do. So, I mean, it had multiple effects, that release of their details.
And you mentioned earlier as well these promises that Police Minister Becky Cele made to these women, to these victims. And it seems like it's just another case of empty promises. And it just makes me wonder, I had another interview yesterday about GBV as well. And it's just, you know, ridiculous at this point when we have these cases, you know, a huge case like this, and then a year later we just sort of forget about it. Do you think there needs to be more pressure on our leaders, the police as well, when it comes to GBV generally? And to what extent do we need to put pressure on them to actually, for something to be done?
They absolutely must have pressure placed on them. You know, in 2013-14, the police and the courts were doing a much better job than they're doing now. Then you had 1 in every 5 rape cases that were reported actually went to court. It's now declined to 1 in 10. That's telling us there's some very serious problems in the quality of police investigation and the prosecution's ability to put cases together. So we can do better. We have done better. We must do better again. But I think what this case is also pointing to is it's raising questions about what has happened to the police's family violence, child protection, and sexual offences unit. Because that's the unit that is responsible for investigating these matters. They probably not had leadership for about 2 years due to the illness of their former brigadier, Bafana Linde. He died last year in December. They've been without experienced leadership. So I think that's had an impact. And I think this case really demands serious consideration of whether or not the Hawks should be involved. It's quite clear from what happened in this case, and these men being armed, that this is not just artisanal mining we're talking about. We're talking about organized crime. And when you start looking at the investigation of Zamas on the West Rand, whether it's in Putong or Stilfontein or other parts of the West Rand, the Hawks have been brought in. So it seems to me this case needs not only the FCS, but it needs the Hawks, who have the capacity and the informant to know these networks amongst the Zamas to be involved. So I seriously think that we should be calling for this investigation to be beefed up and to have the Hawks, those who know the West Rand, who have their networks and informants, to be brought in, because they will know how to, I think, penetrate those networks, which the FCS units don't necessarily do because their work is not investigating Zamas.
And we just mentioned our reporter, Pulele Jones, he was in Krugersdorp and he spoke to residents as well. And they also want justice to be served because at the end of the day, the victims are there and they definitely deserve justice. But this is widespread because now there's a community that also still live in fear because something like this could happen at any moment again because they just don't have trust in our police because a case like this is taking so long to be solved. So, this is pretty widespread psychologically, not just for the victims, but also for community members.
It is, and I think what this case also raises is the importance of holding the Departments of Mineral Resources and Energy accountable as well. Because if you look at the area where this occurred, West Village, in 2018, the mine that was responsible for North Sand Mine Dump, where the rape occurred, was liquidated. The company was called Mintails. And you can see from about 2019 onwards an escalation of all kinds of crime in that area. Rapes, murders, robberies. It's become a very dangerous place to be. And in fact, 3 months before the rapes occurred, the mayor of Mogale City had actually written to the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy asking that the shafts be closed in order to ensure people's safety. It doesn't appear that DMRE ever responded to that letter, and there has been no movement towards closing those shafts. So I think this highlights broader problems around what happens when a mine is abandoned by a company, who's responsible for safety, who's responsible for security, and what is the Department of Mineral Resources' responsibility in trying to ensure safety, because this is not just a problem for the police. So I think we should not only be demanding better accountability from the police for this investigation, but we should also be challenging DMRE to look at these gaps in litigation and to also contribute to making areas much safer.
I want to talk again about the private information of the victims that was leaked a few months ago. The SA Police Service, they also admitted that they were wrong in all of this and they apologized. My first question is an apology enough or should more be done when it comes to this? Because at the end of the day, it was their personal, like you said earlier as well, personal information being leaked, and that has an adverse impact on their psychological well-being. And this could also, be very detrimental for them when you just go for looking for a job. Somebody might know who you are. There's the stigma still around rape victims as well. So how deep is this? How are they coping? The victims right now, a year later, and also with this recently happening to them as well, they must be going through a lot.
Yes, in fact, I think just to remind people, this information was actually leaked within hours of the rape having occurred. So by the next day, people in the streets where they live were already pointing them out. They had people phoning them who they hadn't seen in years, coming from across the province, saying, "Is this you? Is this you?" And you can imagine when you are still in a state of shock, people phoning you up and wanting to know the intimate details of what happened to you, how very distressing that was. I think it was also very difficult for them because they had some members of the media arriving on their doorstep, again, wanting to talk to them within less than 24 hours of this having happened. So I think it was incredibly insensitive then. The information regulator then went ahead and investigated this leaking of their information. And if they hadn't done so, I don't think the police would ever have issued a public apology to these women. What is even more concerning is that what the woman wanted was for whoever leaked the information to be held accountable. It's very serious to have done what they did. It's a violation of the Protection of Personal Information Act, but it's also a violation of the Criminal Procedure Act, which makes it a crime to publish details of a rape complainant. So it is very serious what they did. The police have never wanted to investigate it. They have said so, and they have never wanted to take disciplinary action against those concerned. So I think an apology for the woman feels very, very hollow. There have been no consequences for the police officers who did this, despite the fact that it had such a serious, serious consequences for them. But you know, to this day, they still wonder if they see somebody, is this person following them? Most of us can live a fairly safe life. We don't have those kinds of we don't have to worry about those kinds of things. But people they don't know, men who follow them, men who perhaps haven't seen before, immediately start to trigger off those fears and leave them wondering, who is this person? What do they want from me? A car that drives past the house slowly. So it's made the world very unsafe, and it has aggravated the symptoms of rape, I think, in a way that perhaps that definitely would not have occurred had the police been so much more careful with the handling of their personal information.
And this just talks about the broader challenges, you know, when it comes to protecting the rights of survivors or victims in this matter, not just this matter, but all cases where people are victims of rape and sexual assault. You know, just very lastly from your side, Lisa, I think, you know, the question is now, will they ever get justice, and how long do you think this process will still take?
You know, the longer you leave a case like this, the more difficult it becomes, you know, when it becomes a cold case. Nonetheless, there is DNA. So the point is, I think if the police made the effort, if I think a group like the Hawks was to get involved, then who knows what could happen. It's not impossible that they could not get justice. It's possible that some of those men might get picked up if the police are routinely running matches against all the other DNA samples coming in, because they're clearly operating in a wide area around West Village, all the way through Mephiso and down to Kromdraai in the West Rand. So it's possible that other matches could be made to other rape cases. But I do believe with the effective use of informants who are in the area, who do know Zamas, who are perhaps themselves part of those teams, information could be found. And you know, what has been frustrating, having spent time in West Village, is that there are members of the community who do appear to have information. And yet because they live amongst the Zamas, they see them every single day. And yet it would appear that the police have never been there to question them as to what happened, or where they have tried to volunteer information to follow up on that. So I think these are these points about, you know, we've heard that these men are back in the area. What are the police doing to act on this? Or do they now expect this for the complainants to be left to themselves to do? I mean, one does want to remind the police that just earlier this year, there was the case of Andy Kawa, where the Constitutional Court actually held the police liable for conducting a very poor investigation. You would think that a case like that, where the Constitutional Court said the police are liable for investigation, that they would have taken the necessary steps to improve the quality of their investigations. But that doesn't seem to have been the case.
Like you said, it seems like it needs to be a lot more resources being pushed into, you know, this case and other cases as well, in order for it to be resolved at the end of the day. But thank you so much, Lisa, for your time this evening. And I see the lights are back on, so sorry for the load shedding earlier. But thank you so much for joining us. And luckily we didn't have a issue with a technical issue there because of load shedding. So thank you so much for that. Of course, it's 1 year. The 1 year anniversary, if you would like to call it that, of the Krugersdorp rapes, and how, of course, Lisa's helping the victims coping. And like she said, it's definitely not easy for them, especially after their personal information was also leaked. And it just puts so much more psychological pressures on them to live a normal life. And obviously, after a traumatic experience like that, it is difficult to you know, just go on with life. But hopefully, justice will be served. Now let's go to this. 5 bodies believed to be illegal miners have been found in Rivoli and nearby Zamimpilo informal settlement in Johannesburg. Now police say they responded to a shooting in the area where the bodies were discovered with gunshot wounds, but preliminary investigation suggests that 2 rival groups of the illegal miners were shooting at each other, which led to the fatalities. Now, police have deployed members from the Tactical Response Team and Public Order Policing to monitor the area. A case of murder with 5 counts has been opened, and accounts from locals and videos on social media suggest gangs of men armed with automatic weapons moved through suburban areas to the sound of continuous automatic gunfire. Police are calling on anyone with information that could help with investigations to come forward. Police have arrested 11 suspects in connection with the kidnapping of a businessman in Kuils River in the Western Cape. Now, the multidisciplinary team also rescued the 34-year-old victim, and the suspect allegedly robbed a supermarket and kidnapped the businessman last week. And as soon as the incident was reported, the anti-kidnap team was activated, and the investigation initially led to the arrest of 10 people. A further probe led to the team to an address in Delft, where they rescued the kidnapped man and made another arrest. All suspects are aged between 22 and 43 and are due to make their first appearance in the Blue Downs Magistrates Court tomorrow.